Quilters and fabrics go together, but what about the leftover fabrics, the stash fabrics, the scrap fabrics, you know, that pile in the corner that we try to ignore? Well, not anymore. I want to show you how to transform that scrap pile into a spectacular scrappy quilt. I'm Lea Louise from Inspired Quilting by Lea Louise, and I have some wonderful must-have secrets to share with you. But I don't want them to be secrets anymore. I want to share them with all my quilting friends and show you how to come up with some fantastic quilts. These ideas are going to help you put more pieces together in more interesting ways, and you're going to love the results. So let's go ahead and get started. I don't want you wasting any more fabric. We are going to make some scrappy quilts. You may remember in that last quilt, the potato chip quilt or the scrappy rectangles, I pulled out all kinds of scraps. Now these are strips that I didn't even use for that. I'm going to use these in this next quilt. Oh my gosh, wait till you see this. Such fun. And I have these. So while there's strips in here, these are like less than fat quarters. There's pieces left over from different quilts, and there's all kinds of different pieces in here, and I'm just going to start cutting strips. Now the plan here is to use multiple size strips, and I'm going to make a 12.5-inch block so that the quilt will finish with 12-inch blocks. So that makes it really easy to figure out what size I want. And it's going to have everything. But as always, I want to sort of balance my colors. And for this one, I'm thinking I might use this bundle. Remember, these were just a little bit shy of 2.5 inches, but that's okay because some of these are going to be just a bit more than 2.5 or 3.5, and I can trim and I can make it all work. So going into it knowing that these are an odd size, I can work with that pretty well. But this will be a great constant to have throughout the quilt in multiple blocks because it's in different shades and different prints, but it's going to add that blue-green color scheme throughout the quilt with everything else. So I'm not going to say every block will have one of these, but maybe half the blocks. And then that way I will have a variety that I will have spread throughout the quilt, and it'll carry that color across. And that's where I'm heading. So let me go ahead and start pulling this together, and I'll show you where we're going to start. A plan is beginning to come together. So I selected 9 of these jelly roll strips out of that jelly roll that I had, and I want to kind of bring these colors in. I like the blues and greens. They're lighter, which is going to be great to balance out a lot of these other really dark colors. Now I'm working with 2 sizes right now. I'm starting small and moving up. So I have 2.5-inch strips here. These are with the fabric. These are longish strips, and these are on the shorter side, maybe 8 to 20 inches. And what I'm going to do is take my small 2.5-inch pieces. These are actually, right here, 2.5-inch squares and then 2.5-inch strips. And I'm going to sew one of these to the end of everything. And then I'll go ahead and start cross-cutting all these pieces. So that's going to get done here. And I have the same thing with my 3-inch. So I have 3-inch squares and some strips of assorted lengths, and I'm going to attach them to my 3-inch lengths that I have. So I'm going to work on this first. That'll help me kind of get a grasp of just what I'm doing and how I'm going to do it. And then we'll come back and talk about how it's all going together. But I'm liking how this is looking. You notice, though, that pile, it doesn't look like it's gone down a bit. I think I may be doing scrapping quilts for a very long time. I have a big pile here filled with joined strips. I have long pieces that I've attached short pieces to, and you can see here that I'll take one strip, I'll sew a short end to that, then I'll bring this around next to it, the other end, and add a second strip. So this way I'm working from both ends. Now this one, the selvage hadn't been cut off, so I just took my seam allowance down below the selvage, and when I come back and trim this block, I can trim that off. So here's, let's see, like here's another one. So I have this turquoise strip right here. Let me set these aside. And I sewed this one on here. And then I came around, I folded it up and sewed this one on. And like I said, this just works for me because I'm sewing from both ends at the same time as I'm going through my strips, and I don't have to, turn around and come back the other direction in order to get the other ends. Now on this first round, I stuck with anything that is 2.5 inches by more than 2.5 inches. So it's larger than the 2.5 inch squares. I'll add these after, but I wanted to get pieces in that I can then go back and trim down and size them so that I can get my 12.5 inch strip, because I want all my individual strips to be 12.5 inches. So like here's one here, I have a couple put together, and this will probably cut at about this spot, because let's see, 10, 11, 12, yeah, so this is about 12.5 inches. But I can also come in with another piece and put that right there. So it depends on what you want to do, but let me explain the reason why I'm making them in different, what do I want to say, different lengths, because when I put my strips all together, they will all measure 12.5 inches, but I don't want them all to be divided in the same place. So when I put my 12.5 inch strips together, we're not going to have matching seams. Everything's just going to be a little bit different as we go through. And that's a big time saver, because I can just press everything, all the seam allowances in one direction, and then I can just put my strips together and sew everything into one big piece. So like this one here is probably a 7-inch, and I would need like a 5-inch to get my 12 total, and that'll be good. I can use this. And so considering there's going to be approximately 5 strips per block, it'll be nice to have an assortment where some have long pieces, others have multiple short pieces, and it's just going to make it all that much more interesting. And that's just where I'm going. So I'm going to keep sewing on these, and I will show you when I get to a point where more of them are made, how they are looking and how it's all going to go together. I've used a lot of the strips. I mean, I probably have less than 8 or 10 of that big pile of strips that I started with, and I used the entire pile of the small ones, and there were a lot in there. So I figure I'm going to be making 30 blocks. This quilt will be 5 by 6. It's going to be 12 inches, so that's 60 by 72, which is a nice size lap quilt. And so I'm going to continue trimming these, and then I'll kind of get some piecing done, and I'll show you what everything looks like from there. Scrappy quilts are great fun for me. I love pulling all my fabrics together. Once I decide on the size piece of fabric that I need, I pull everything that's that size or larger and pile it on the table, sort through it, figure out what I'm going to do, how I'm going to make it work, and it's everything that I've used before. Generally, I don't use brand new fabric because I've bought it for something else. That'll become a scrap quilt later down the road when I make that particular quilt. But in the meantime, I need to clear out some room. So I get my fabrics, I pile it up, I get my plan together, I start cutting and measuring and figuring out what size block it'll be, and then I get to the sewing machine. And this is another place where you can get some scrappy done as well. Get your old spools of thread. Now, if the thread breaks in your hands when you snap it, don't use it, throw it away. But just because you haven't used it for a while doesn't mean it can't be used. And who needs a bunch of thread spools that are just about empty? Use them up. And do the same with your bobbins. We all have bobbins that are only half full. use them on your scrappy quilts. It's a great way to clear out a lot of clutter and excess that we don't need to deal with every day. I do want to share real quick, I've had some questions about this quilt hanging behind me. This is my first scrappy quilt, and I did this, it's over 20 years ago. And the funny thing about it is I had no idea how to go about it. I just cut squares and I cut sashing and little cornerstones. You can see those little purple squares in between the turquoise strips, and it just came together really well. I didn't even know about charm squares in those days. I don't know if they started making them. I was buying fat quarters, but I didn't know about charm squares. That was something new, but I kind of figured that out on my own with this quilt. The best part is that this quilt tells a story. These are all the fabrics that I made my first quilts with 20 plus years ago. All the batiks are just, they're beautiful, and I can look at each one and remember a quilt and who it was made for and the pattern that I use. And so while we can make some fantastic scrappy quilts, we can make spectacular quilts with the way we lay them out and how we use our colors, but they can be more spectacular in other ways as well. The memories can be cherished for a very long time. We have some strips that are coming together, and it's starting to look like a patchwork block. I think we're going to finally get there. This has been a lot of piecing and cutting and sewing, but oh my goodness, I've gone through a ton of scraps. That's fantastic. So I was talking earlier about the different strips I'm going to make. This one is the two-piece. So everything in this little pile is made with two pieces. They may not be split exactly in the center. It could be offset, one longer, one shorter, but I just want one seam. Then the next strip I made has two seams. So we have three pieces of fabric in here. And then this, when they're joined, are not going to have matching seams, and that's really important to me. So I start by putting these two together. Here's a two-piece strip and then a three-piece, and I set those together, and I have a bunch of them. I should have about 30 because I know I'm going to need 30 blocks. Then to this, I added my four-piece strips. You can see I did some with fours, and they're not all equal. And that's fine. If you have equal sizes, that's great, but I'm just using leftover pieces of what I have. And, some of these I put in different directions, like here's a two-piece on the edge with four in the middle. So that way it's not going to look like a consistent block that repeats throughout the quilt. Now, let's just take a look at this here. Let's say we do this. So here's our 6 strips, right? And this is what our quilt will look like. Well, we're going to have blocks like this, but then we're going to turn them. So every other block will go in a different direction. So one thing I want to explain and kind of just bring to light is every quilt we make anymore today is based on one of the traditional quilts. This would be a rail fence. We have all these strips going in one direction, and then when we place them in the quilt, we turn them to create various patterns. But the last one we did last week, we called the potato chip block, the scrappy rectangles, and there's a number one. I think another, like the lumberjack, I think somebody had made mention. So that's a quilt that's been around, but it's a log cabin. It's the courthouse steps. And then the week before that, we were doing a 9-patch and turning it into a disappearing 9-patch. All with scraps, all creating beautiful quilts based on traditional quilt patterns, but we're jazzing them up and bringing them into this century so we can have a lot more fun with them. And that's where we're going. So right now, there's one other step before I start joining these, and that's what I want to show you next. Putting these blocks together at this point is kind of a big question for me. I don't know exactly how it's all going to fit because I use scrapped, they're varying widths, and I just don't know how it's going to turn out. So I want to have some extra variables that I can work with. Now, one of the things I really want to do in this particular quilt is add some, whoops, I thought I had these cut and I don't have my scissors, is add some 2.5 inch square blocks or strips. So I've started piecing these, and then what I'll do is, put that there, and then, add another one, and just so I get my 6 pieces. Of course, this is too much. So we're going to have a lot going on in this quilt, and I have these pieces, I have large pieces. These are the smaller sections, and it's just going to create a great variety of fabric and patterns and everything together, and I think it's going to look absolutely wonderful. And what I wanted to show you here is I have a lot of the single 2.5, and then I had some of the short pieces of 2.5 inches. And so I started sewing pieces together. So first I took a 2.5 inch strip, and they're anywhere from 16 to 20 inches. And I would just start sewing charms to them. And then I would cross cut it, and I would take this pair and add it to another strip. So I think I have the first strip here. There they are. Are they over here? Here's the very first set. So I took just a plain strip, and I attached individual 2.5 inch squares on top. And then when I cut those, I got my pairs just like this. Where are they? So I have my pairs, and then I took the pairs, I came through, I cross cut and trimmed. I only cut on one side because I'll trim the other side when I trim the entire piece. So I'm taking little steps like that to save time along the way. And then this one is going to be a three piece, but I took all the 2 pieces from this and attached it to another strip to get my 3 pieces, because I know I'm going to need about 6 per row. And then I just started cutting them, and I have them all here, and now I need to come in and press them, put them together, and I probably won't attach them until I actually get them into a block, because I have a lot of different prints in here, and then that way I can kind of pick and choose so that I don't replicate particular patterns in the same block, or at least not too much. Alternatively, the other thing I have that is sort of my backup is taking some individual pieces and just cutting these to the width I need. So if I have some of these already in this block, or it's looking too busy, I want to put this in just to create a little bit of more interest. It's always about adding interest, color, balance, accents. It all works together. But this can be in any width, and this would be kind of fun if half or so of the blocks had this, because then it does start creating a pattern throughout the quilt when you have these narrow pieces. And of course, like I said, this is a rail fence, so if all of them had them on this side, then you can actually build a rail fence quilt pattern design by placing these accordingly. So there's a lot you can do with this, but I'm just having fun putting these blocks together, and I think they look wonderful. So I'm going to go work on getting a couple finished blocks so I can show you. They're coming together great. Here's my first finished block, and I'm really liking it. All these colors are just such fun. I think it's going to look great in a quilt. Now, I cut all my strips. I wanted to finish at 12.5, so I cut a lot of them at 13, just to make sure I had some trimming room. Now, these were all 2.5 inches, and I think this one was a little bit bigger down here, but that's okay. I'm going to trim them now, and I'm going to trim everything to 12.5. So most of the trimming will be on the sides. So I have my square ruler. It just makes it easier when you do a large square like this. It holds it in place as you're cutting, whereas on the mat, when you lift your ruler, things can kind of move around a little. I want to make sure that any of the narrow pieces are outside the ruler so that I get everything and I don't lose any corners along the way. And I'm just going to cut here, and I don't have a turntable, so I'll just rotate my quilt block and cut the other direction line my corners, line my edges, make sure everything is straight. And cut this side. Oh, look at that. Everything's just nice and lined up. And there we are. So it's very easy to do. And whoops, I didn't push down hard enough. And the trimming is pretty minor. Like I said, you can do it on your mat with just a 6-inch ruler if that's easier for you. Like I said, I just prefer because it's a square. It helps hold in place. But this is my first block. And let me show you a couple others. And look at this one. And this one. Look at that. Aren't those colors wonderful? Now, the way this is going together will be in an alternating pattern. And what I want to do is lay these blocks out and show you the pattern that I want. And let's see, it just requires we do some alternating. And you see how this goes sideways, this is vertical, and then we come down here and turn it around. And then this one will go vertical like that. Now this is where you can actually create a real fence by using your solid colors or a specific color in these rows only. But I'm just going for a totally scrappy quilt. And you know, like there's a lot of darkish colors here. I can, let's see, kind of lighten that up a little that way or lighten it up that way. That works better. And then I can bring this over here. So, you know, play around with it and see what you like best and where you like everything placed. And then we're just going to put it together. I'm making 30 blocks. It'll be 5 by 6 blocks. And I figure that's going to be about 60 by 72, which would be a great size. So there it is. And like I said, I've been making a bunch of scrappy quilts these last few weeks. So when I get all of them finished together, we'll have a reveal video. So these videos, I only have time to sort of put the blocks together and show you how to assemble them and not necessarily create the whole quilt. So that's going to be fun. There's at least 3, maybe 4 that I can think of that when I get finished, we'll go ahead and do this. But don't count on it before Memorial Day. This won't happen until probably June. There's a lot going on, including 2 weeks with me taking care of the grandkids. So there won't be much quilting done then. But this is it. I'm so glad you joined me. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you see some ideas that you can use here. This is a great way to make a quilt. And by making them bigger, you can make the block bigger, you can make it smaller, you can use fewer pieces, whatever it is you want to do. Just get your scraps together, put them in a pile like I did, and just start pulling from them, cut them, and make your quilt. Oh, it's going to be wonderful. And you can make a few blocks at a time. This is something that you don't have to do all at once. So there really are no excuses not to use your scraps. We've had a lot of ideas that we've talked about in the last few weeks. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it. It's always wonderful having you join me. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great rest of your day.